And welcome, sir. Glad to have you with us this morning. And to everybody, welcome back to our continuing Bible study series on the life lessons that we can learn from the life of David. Now, last time we met, which was 2 Sunday mornings ago, from the life of David, we learned 3 biblical principles to defeat giant problems. Now, we all know that we all experience problems in our lives. Our problems may be of our own creation, or maybe we may feel sometimes that we are being unfairly challenged by our problems. Our problems may be related to our relationships, our careers, our finances, our health, or whatever. And sometimes our problems may seem like a big old mean giant and too tough to overcome or too scary to even face. But the great news is that Christ Jesus will never leave you nor forsake you, which really is great news because according to Christ Jesus in Matthew chapter 19, verse 26, with men this is impossible, with God all things are possible. So no matter how big our problem may be, doesn't matter what type of a giant problem it is, the God of all creation will make the impossible possible for you. So to defeat giant problems, you need to replace fear with faith. You need to refuse to be discouraged, and you need to remember your past victories. Now this Sunday morning, we are continuing our continuing Bible study series on the life lessons that we can learn from the life of David in 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 20. As we learn 3 biblical principles for dealing with difficult people. Now, I'm a father and a husband, so I have 4 women in my house, so I know how to deal with difficult people. 3 teenagers in one house is enough right there to drive a man insane. Although my oldest today, she's still technically a teenager. She reminded me of that when I reminded her that at 18, she turns 18 today, that's about 4 o'clock this morning. She is now an adult, but she doesn't like that idea. She's still a teenager in her eyes. Dealing with difficult people, I think it's rather safe to state that each and every one of us have been forced to deal with at least one difficult person at some point in our life. And David was obviously no exception. After David defeated Goliath, leading to Israel's victory over the Philistines, everyone all throughout Israel knew the name of this young shepherd boy. In 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 1 through 5, it says, "And it came to pass, when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved David as his own soul. And Saul took David that day, and would let him go no more home to his father's house. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant, because Jonathan loved David as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him, and gave it to David, and his garments, even to his sword, and to his bow, and to his girdle. And David went out whithersoever Saul sent him, and behaved himself wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. So after David's success, he became best friends with King Saul's oldest son, Jonathan, who gave David his royal robe, armor, sword, bow, and belt, which meant that David was now equipped with the best of the best military equipment available at that time. And King Saul even set David over the men of war. And it came to pass, as they came, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tabrets, with joy, and with instruments of music. And the women answered one another as they played, and said, Saul hath slain his thousands, but David his 10,000s. And Saul was very wroth, and the saying displeased him. And he said, They have ascribed unto David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed but thousands. And what can he have more but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day forward. So upon their return from the battle, the women shouted out their praises for Saul and David, but Saul was not happy, because the women ascribed unto David 10,000s, but to Saul they ascribed only thousands. From that day forward, David's relationship with Saul grew increasingly difficult, and it is from this chapter in David's life this morning that we can learn 3 biblical principles for dealing with difficult people. The first of which is to remember why people are difficult. See, in 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 8 through 30, there are at least 3 reasons why people can be difficult. The first one is insecurity. You see, as a result of David's success and popularity, Saul grew very angry. The Hebrew word translated here as wrath refers to a burning anger that can flare up at any time. Saul becomes a very difficult person because he felt threatened by David. Saul was God's anointed king of Israel. As such, he should have known God's truth as found in Psalm chapter 28, verse 8. The Lord is their strength, and he is the saving strength of his anointed. So the first reason people can be difficult is insecurity or feeling threatened. We see that all around us all the time. I'll use a personal example. When I first started working at the college, there was a supervisor there who knew that he didn't have the same level of experience as I did. And he immediately started acting out towards me because he was afraid I would take his job. I wasn't interested in his job. It was his boss's job I wanted. But so he didn't have anything to worry about. But he acted out against me the same way that Saul is now acting out against David. But the first reason people can be difficult is insecurity or feeling threatened. But the second reason is jealousy. In 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 10 and 11, and it came to pass on the morrow that the evil spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied in the midst of the house, and David played with his hand as at other times. And there was a javelin in Saul's hand, and Saul cast the javelin, for he said, I will smite David even to the wall with it. And David avoided out of his presence twice. So from the time David became very successful and popular, Saul eyed David from that day and forward, which means jealous eye, if you will. Saul grew so jealous of David that one day while David played his lyre, Saul hurled his spear at David. But David avoided it not just once, but twice. Well, this guy is pretty angry and hateful. And we know that jealousy leads to anger. Anger leads to hatred. And here we have a great example. Jealousy is causing King Saul to attempt murder. Not just once, but already twice right there. Jealousy or envy is one of the most vicious of all ill feelings. That's why God warns us in James chapter 3 and verse 16, for where envying and strife is, there is confusion and every evil work. Insecurity and jealousy can cause people to be difficult. However, there's also a third reason. It's called fear. In 1 Samuel 18, verses 12 through 16, and Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David and was departed from Saul. Therefore, Saul removed David from him and made David his captain over 1,000. And David went out and came in before the people. And David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with David. Wherefore, when Saul saw that David behaved himself very wisely, he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he went out and came in before them. In Saul's case, not only was he insecure and jealous, but he was also fearful of being replaced. You see, David had earned himself quite a fan club among his fellow Israelites. Saul, however, did not appreciate that and became worried because Israel loved David, possibly even more than they loved King Saul. Saul should have known what David later wrote in Psalm 27, verse 1. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? You see, if Saul had remained faithful to God, he would never have needed to fear anyone. But continuing on in 1 Samuel 18, verses 17 through 21, and Saul said to David, Behold, my elder daughter Merab, her will I give thee to wife. Only be thou valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles. For Saul said, Let not mine hand be upon David, but let the hand of the Philistines be upon him. And David said unto Saul, Who am I, and what is my life or my father's family in Israel, that I should be son-in-law to the king? But it came to pass at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, that she was given unto Adriel the Meholathite to wife. And Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David, and they told Saul, and the thing pleased Saul. And Saul said, I will give him her, that she may be a snare to David, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Wherefore Saul said to David, Thou shalt this day be my son-in-law in the one of the twain. So Saul offered his daughter Merab to David, who declined, so Saul gave her away to someone else. But another of Saul's daughters, Michal, fell in love with David. Saul liked this and offered Michal to David, but apparently not to make his daughter happy. Saul did not approach David directly. Rather, he instructed some of his servants to drop hints to David like a teenager passing notes in middle school. David responded, "Seemeth it to you a light thing to be a king's son-in-law, seeing that I am a poor man and lightly esteemed?" By the way, this statement, combined with David's response to Saul concerning Merab, demonstrates David's humility. The phrase lightly esteemed implied that David considered himself to be, if you will, despised in Israel, even though we know the opposite was true. And while David may have been poor, a dowry should not have even been a consideration anyway. I'll mention that again in a moment. But Saul's servants informed David, "The king desireth not any dowry, but 100 foreskins of the Philistines to be avenged of the king's enemies." Now remember, 2 weeks back we discussed this. The 3 rewards promised to whomever killed Goliath was first great riches. The third was the hero's entire family would be exempted from the impositions and service to which the average Israelites were subjected to, such as taxes, tolls, tributes, customs, and of course military service. But the second one is the most important here. Saul's daughter's hand in marriage. That was already promised. So there should be no dowry whatsoever. But the king is not a trustworthy fellow. And so he's already gone against his word. Well, you want my daughter-in-law, or you want my daughter to wife, then you have to do something, which is not part of the original promise. So now why does Saul demand any dowry payment or any sort of anything at all? And why do you think Saul twice offered to give David his daughters? One reason may have been to better control David and use David's popularity to help boost Saul's dwindling popularity. But the answer for both of these 2 questions is found in 1 Samuel 18 and 17. For Saul said, "Let not mine hand be upon David, but let the hand of the Philistines be upon him." And also in 1 Samuel 18:25, Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. Saul's main desire was to do as David later did with Uriah. He wanted to send him off to die in battle. So David, though, successfully went out and killed not just 100, but 200 Philistines, which is twice the full payment to become Saul's son-in-law. So David married Michal, but instead of being happy for Michal, Saul was yet the more afraid of David, and Saul became David's enemy continually. So to deal with difficult people, remember why people are difficult. Insecurity, jealousy, and fear are the 3 main reasons why people may be difficult. Sometimes it's also just because they have other problems going on in their life, and you don't know what's going on until you say something, and next thing you know, you're in the middle of we'll call it a heated discussion. "Well, why are you talking to me?" Because you look, it's just like asking a wife, "Are you feeling okay?" "I'm fine." Okay. Anyway, meanwhile, back at the ranch, the second way to deal with difficult people is to retain your sense of humor. In 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 30, "Then the princes of the Philistines went forth, and it came to pass after they went forth that David behaved himself more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that David's name was much set by." So David only grew more popular, which only served to make Saul grow more jealous and hateful. And in 1 Samuel 19, verse 1, Saul spake to Jonathan, his son, and to all his servants that they should kill David. So because of David's growing popularity, Saul told Jonathan and all of his servants to murder David. However, Jonathan, who, as we know already, is best friends with David, Jonathan warned David, and then Jonathan spoke to his father about David, reminding Saul that David had never done anything ill toward him, but had only been a blessing to Israel. And then Jonathan warned the king to not do anything to harm David, and Saul promised not to murder David. Now, that's what Saul promised, but we already know that Saul is not a man of honor. He is not a man of his word. So Saul's promise was short-lived. In 1 Samuel chapter 19, verses 9 and 10, "And the evil spirit from the Lord was upon Saul, and as he sat in his house with his javelin in his hand, and David played with his hand." And Saul sought to smite David even to the wall with the javelin. But David slipped away out of Saul's presence, and Saul smote the javelin into the wall, and David fled and escaped that night. So now a third time, while David was playing his lyre, Saul threw another spear at David. Fortunately, David escaped unharmed once again. We continue in verses 11 through 13. Saul also sent messengers under David's house to watch him and to slay him in the morning. And Michal, David's wife, told him, saying, If thou save not thy life tonight, tomorrow thou shalt be slain. So Michal let David down through a window, and he went and fled and escaped. And Michal took an image and laid it in the bed and put a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster and covered it with a cloth. So David's wife, Michal, warned David to get out of town or he might be killed. And then Michal let David down through a window, and to help cover David's escape, Michal pulled off the classic teenager pillow person in the bed trick. She made it look like there was a person in the bed, covered it up with the blanket, and when the folks come around, see, he's sleeping, let him be. You know, and our children today, our teenagers, think they invented this trick. It goes all the way back to Bible times. But David fled to Samuel, the high priest, at Naioth in Ramah. When Saul learned where David was, 3 times Saul sent different groups of men to capture David. And amusingly, each time they entered Samuel's presence, the Spirit of God was upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied. I like this. Now, God's word does not explain what they prophesied, but it could imply that they simply joined in worship, uttering words of praise to God. We don't know. There's no explanation or further information about that. But we do know that they got into the presence of the high priest of God, and they started prophesying as well, instead of going there to do what they were commanded to do. But then in 1 Samuel 19, 22 and 23, then went Saul unto Ramah, and came to a great well that is in Sechu. And he asked and said, Where are Samuel and David? And one said, Behold, they be at Naioth in Ramah. And Saul went thither to Naioth in Ramah. So finally, Saul traveled to Naioth in Ramah himself. But note what happened when Saul arrived in verse 23 and 24. And the Spirit of God was upon Saul also, and he went on and prophesied until he came to Naioth in Ramah. And Saul stripped off his clothes also and prophesied before Samuel in like manner, and lay down naked all that day and all that night. Wherefore they say, Is Saul also among the prophets? When all this happened, I think the divine result is described in Psalm 2, verse 4. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. God clearly has a sense of humor. So when we have to deal with difficult people, one thing that can help us to retain our sense of humor. After all, either you learn to laugh at the problems of life or cry because of them. Saul is going there because he wants to kill David, but God wasn't going to allow that to happen. Instead, Saul came upon the presence of God, and God kind of made a fool out of him. Not kind of. God made a fool out of him. And folks, if you are intentionally trying to go against what God has told you to do, be prepared. God might just make a fool out of you. Just saying. But the first 2 biblical principles for dealing with difficult people then are to remember why people are difficult. Again, it's insecurity, jealousy, and fear. And to retain your sense of humor. And thirdly, to refuse to be revengeful. Apparently, Saul did not see either the humor in those miraculous events, nor did he learn any lessons from them either. So in 1 Samuel chapter 20, verses 1 through 3, And David fled from Naioth in Ramah, and came and said before Jonathan, What have I done? What is mine iniquity? And what is my sin before thy father, that he seeketh my life? And Jonathan said unto David, God forbid, thou shalt not die. Behold, my father will do nothing, either great or small, but that he will show it me. And why should my father hide this thing from me? It is not so. And David sware moreover, and said, Thy father certainly knoweth that I have found grace in thine eyes. And he saith, Let not Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. David fled back to his best friend, but Jonathan just could not believe that his own father would do something this evil, especially not without telling him. But take careful note of what David said to Jonathan, which revealed David's fear. In verse 3, But truly as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, there is but a step between me and death. He knows that he's just one step away from death. That's a scary place to be. I don't blame David for being scared. The king of Israel is personally seeking his life. And for what sin had he committed? Nothing. Only because he was serving the king and serving God faithfully. But realizing David's fears, then said Jonathan unto David, whatsoever thy soul desireth, I will even do it for thee. So David said unto Jonathan, behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit with the king at meat. But let me go, that I may hide myself in the field unto the third day at even. If thy father at all miss me, then say, David earnestly asked leave of me, that he might run to Bethlehem, his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the family. If Saul say thus, it is well, thy servant shall have peace. But if he be very wroth, then be sure that evil is determined by Saul. So David suggested a way for Jonathan to find out for himself the condition of Saul's heart. And in verses 24 through 34, we know that David went and hid himself in a field for this feast of the new moon. And the king sat himself down to eat meat, and the king sat upon his seat, and as at other times, even upon a seat by the wall. And Jonathan arose, and Abner sat by Saul's side, and David's place was empty. Nevertheless, Saul spake not anything that day, for he thought, something hath befallen David. He is not clean. Surely he is not clean. And it came to pass on the morrow, which was the second day of the month, that David's place was empty. And Saul said unto Jonathan his son, wherefore cometh not the son of Jesse to meat, neither yesterday nor today? And Jonathan answered Saul, David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. And David said, let me go, I pray thee, for our family hath a sacrifice in the city, and my brother, he hath commanded me to be there. And now, if I have found favor in thine eyes, let me get away, I pray thee, and see my brethren. Therefore David cometh not unto the king's table. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan. And Saul said unto Jonathan, thou son of the perverse, rebellious woman, do not I know that thou hast chosen the son of Jesse to thine own confusion, and unto the confusion of thy mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse liveth upon the ground, thou shalt not be established, nor thy kingdom. Wherefore now send and fetch David unto me, for he shall surely die. And Jonathan answered Saul his father, and said unto him, wherefore shall David be slain? What hath David done? And Saul cast a javelin at Jonathan to smite him, whereby Jonathan knew that it was determined of his father to slay David. So Jonathan arose from the table in fierce anger, and did eat no meat the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David, because his father had done him shame. Jonathan was angry at his father's shameful and sinful behavior. The next morning, as agreed, Jonathan and his servant went to shoot arrows in a field where he knew David was hiding behind a rock pile. Jonathan shot his arrow to warn David to flee, and after the signal arrived, we witnessed one of the most emotional scenes in God's holy word. In verses 41 and 42, we read, and as soon as the lad was gone, David arose out of a place toward the south, and fell on his knees to the ground, and bowed himself 3 times, and they kissed one another, and wept one with another, until David exceeded. And Jonathan said to David, go in peace, for as much as we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord be between me and thee, and between my seed and thy seed forever. And David arose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. Jonathan and David knew they would probably never see each other again. Even though David was the anointed king of Israel, he never displayed a vengeful spirit towards Saul. After all, according to Romans chapter 12 and verse 19, we read, dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Rather, when forced to deal with difficult people, be sure to obey God's command. In just a few verses away, Romans chapter 12, verse 20 and 21, therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink, for in so doing thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. So the 3 biblical principles for dealing with difficult people are to remember why people are difficult, insecurity, jealousy, and fear, and retain a sense of humor and refuse to be revengeful. Now, I didn't really talk about it too much, but up there, Not only has Saul's jealousy now led to a desire to murder David, but it led him to attempt to murder his own son. Now, he said, for as long as the son of Jesse liveth upon the ground, in verse 31 of chapter 20, Saul said, again, I just moved it and lost my place there. Thou shalt not be established, nor thy kingdom. He's speaking that this is your kingdom. If you want to take it, you have to let this guy die. Now, when Jonathan didn't agree, Saul attempted to murder his own son, the heir to his throne. Generally speaking, the oldest son is usually the most beloved in a family from the father. The first son, that's what dads live for, is that son. And here he is trying to murder his own son. This is how evil jealousy of others can be. You think it's just a little sin. Oh, it's not. Look what it's leading to. It's leading a man to try to murder his own son. Not just an innocent man, but his own son. This is a very sad situation, and all because of jealousy. And that's not the lesson for today, but it's an important lesson nonetheless. Friends, if you are harboring ill feelings towards anyone, you need to get right with God. We just learned about this last week. God commands us to forgive, and even more so, to love others. We are first commanded to love others as ourselves. But later, Christ added to it in John chapter 13, verses 34 and 35, a new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another as I have loved you, that ye also love one another. That's the word of Christ Jesus himself. By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another. See, unfortunately, we all have to deal with difficult people in our lives, and sometimes these difficult people may be at work or at school or while shopping. It could be our friends or family or even at church. But if we desire to be Christians after God's own heart, we must absolutely learn how to deal biblically with these difficult people. After all, according to 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 20, we are ambassadors for Christ. Christ, as I just read, commanded us to love others as he loved us. And we're his ambassadors. You cannot run around being vengeful, hateful, angry, or jealous of other people and still claim to be an ambassador for Christ. Even on the cross, Christ Jesus was not hateful towards those who were murdering him. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. What an amazing example Christ set for us. He's dying on the cross, a very slow and painful death, and yet he didn't say, God, kill these criminals. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Friends, I'm not trying to preach Brother Bill's message. I'm just telling you that if you harbor ill feelings towards someone else, you are living in sin. And the only way you're going to get right with God is to get right with them. They don't even have to know about it. But you need to get right with whoever it is. And when I say get right with them, it's really getting right with yourself. What good does it do you to be angry at anyone else? If you can tell me what good it does, I'll be impressed, because I can't think of anything. Maybe it helps you feel a little better about yourself when you are hateful towards someone else. Well, that's not what God has commanded us. God commands us to love one another. Not just a little bit, but as Christ loves us. And how much does Christ love us? As they say, this much. Enough to die willingly, a slow and painful death on the cross of Calvary for you. Love one another. But the three biblical principles for dealing with difficult people are to remember why people are difficult, again, insecurity, jealousy, and fear, to retain a sense of humor, and refuse to be revengeful. But if I were to summarize the key principle in dealing with difficult people with one verse, it would be this. John chapter 15, verse 12, "This is my commandment, that ye love one another as I have loved you." No matter how evil anyone acts towards you, your command, straight from the mouth of God, is to love them as Christ loves you. What an amazing concept. Love one another. And of course, another way to learn how to deal with difficult people is to be sure to be right back here in your rightful place next Sunday morning as we continue our continuing Bible study series on the life lessons that we can learn from the life of David. We're going to learn 3 biblical principles for what to do when you falter in your faith from 1 Samuel chapter 21 and 22.